Imagine walking into your family home only to find it ransacked, portraits overturned, and every heirloom smashed on the floor. That's what Cleopatra faced when she returned to Alexandria at just 17. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was gone, her co-ruler brother Ptolemy XIII had seized power, and the palace corridors echoed with the whispers of palace guards who no longer saluted her. It was as if the very foundations of her world had trembled and collapsed, and she was left standing alone amid the rubble. Cleopatra's lineage stretched back over 3 centuries, Macedonian Greeks who'd ruled Egypt since Alexander's conquests. Yet by 51 BC, dynastic infighting had hollowed out the royal family's authority. Court factions jockeyed for favor, foreign powers eyed Egypt's wealth, and the people grumbled under heavy taxation. When her father died, he hadn't named a clear successor, and the eldest siblings, Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII, found themselves thrust into a deadly sibling rivalry. Cleopatra adored Alexandria's grand libraries and bustling harbors. Ptolemy? He preferred whispers behind velvet-draped doors, supported by his eunuch army. In those opening moments, Cleopatra's world was shattered. Her advisors told her to flee, to hide in the countryside, to wait for her brother's ambitions to burn out. But Cleopatra wasn't the sort to cower in the shadows. She gathered her retinue, loyal courtiers who'd grown up with her, and retreated to the temple precincts, where priests still recognized her divine ancestry. There, she made a startling decision. Instead of pleading for mercy, she would fight back. She sent messengers to loyal garrisons, promising clemency to all who'd lay down arms and swear fealty to her. She dispatched envoys to Rome, dangling Egypt's grain supply like a lure. The palace intrigue was suffocating. Spies lurked in every corridor. Every flattering word from her brother's eunuchs contained a dagger's promise. Cleopatra's small retinue was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered at every turn. Yet she found allies in Alexandria's merchants, whose ships depended on stability in the Nile Delta, and in the priests of Serapis, who saw in her a living goddess worthy of worship. Cleopatra's dynasty lay in fragments. 2 young siblings locked in a power struggle, the palace split by shifting loyalties, and Rome's legions casting a long shadow over Egypt's independence. Cleopatra knew that to rebuild her shattered house, she'd have to forge an alliance more daring than any Egypt had ever seen. And at the heart of that plan was one man whose name alone could tip the balance of empires. The Mediterranean breeze carried more than salt spray and merchant chatter in late 49 BC. It carried rumors of civil war in Rome. Pompey the Great, once Caesar's ally, now stood as his bitter rival, mustering legions to oppose him. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, Rome erupted. Pompey fled Italy, hounded by Caesar's swift legions, and looked for safe harbor. His journey would lead him, and inadvertently Cleopatra, into a collision course that would shake the ancient world. Picture this. A warship cuts through the waves into the port of Alexandria, banners tattered, oars dripping blood. On board lies Pompey, broken, desperate, carrying the hopes of the senatorial faction and his own desperate pride. He arrives seeking sanctuary, expecting grain, gold, and support from Ptolemy XIII, whom he had once aided in a previous dynastic spat. Instead, Ptolemy's advisors saw an opportunity. By handing Pompey over to Caesar, they might earn Caesar's favor and secure their own grip on power. So Pompey's fate was sealed in a handshake, one conspirator's palm pressed against another's in false friendship. Guards dragged the exiled general from his ship onto the royal quay, where he pleaded, first for mercy, then for simple asylum. His eyes pleaded both for the throne he'd served and for the Rome he'd protected. But Ptolemy's courtiers, thirsty for Caesar's gold and protection, stabbed Pompey to death on the steps of the palace. When news reached Cleopatra, she was torn. Pompey's murder was a shocking betrayal, an insult to Roman tradition, and a heinous crime against hospitality. Yet it offered her a precious opening. Caesar was enraged by Pompey's execution. He demanded those responsible be punished, which gave Cleopatra leverage to position herself as the aggrieved party. She would not let her brother's treachery stand unchallenged. In a dramatic gamble, she composed a letter to Caesar, portraying herself as the rightful queen, betrayed by treacherous advisors. She appealed to Roman notions of justice and virtue. Couriers raced across the desert, slipping past Ptolemy's patrols, and delivered her missive straight into Caesar's camp. It was a bold play. Cleopatra cast herself as both a victim and a fellow claimant to Caesar's generosity. Pompey's death, intended as a masterstroke by Ptolemy's faction, had instead sparked the very Roman intervention that would topple them. In a twist of fate, the fallen Roman hero, had unwittingly forged Cleopatra's path to power. The palace buzzed like a hornet's nest after Caesar's ultimatum. Hushed conspiracies rippled through the gilded corridors. Ptolemy XIII's ministers shuffled parchments in secret councils. Cleopatra paced her private chambers, listening to whispers from her ladies-in-waiting. Some loyal, some spies in silken gowns. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A single misstep, and Caesar's legions would march on Alexandria, blood would stain the marble floors, and Cleopatra would become a footnote in history. Inside the harem, usually a place of luxury and ritual, tension clotted the air. Eunuchs delivered messages in shadowy alcoves. Royal pages switched faces, carrying orders from one faction to the next. Cleopatra knew that to reclaim her throne, she'd need inside information. Which generals were wavering, which merchants would fund Caesar's army, and which priests could sway the city's populace. She summoned her most trusted advisor, Diomedes, a Greek courtier who'd grown up with her. In the flicker of oil lamps, he outlined Ptolemy's plans. Secret bribes to the Roman commander Achilles, hidden caches of weapons, civilian militias ready to ambush Caesar's landing parties. Cleopatra digested this intelligence and hatched a plan, one that required her to infiltrate her brother's council itself. Disguised as a noblewoman attending a religious ceremony, Cleopatra slipped past the palace guard. Draped in the saffron robe of Isis's priestess, she joined a midnight rite in the temple courtyard, where Ptolemy's ministers met under the pretense of divine council. As incense swirled, she edged close enough to overhear. Achilles was to prevent any Roman ally from accessing the palace harbor. Merchants loyal to Ptolemy would see Caesar's fleet stranded offshore. Armed with this knowledge, Cleopatra raced to her chambers and penned a desperate plea to Caesar. "My brother plots your doom. The harbor is sealed. I alone can guide you safely." Her hand shook, not from fear, but from the exhilarating danger of defying palace law. She sealed the letter with her signet, a lioness clutching an anchor, and entrusted it to Diomedes. That night, under a new moon, the letter departed in a sealed jar, floating down the palace aqueduct until divers retrieved it near Caesar's camp. Meanwhile, in the harem, rumors flew. Who couriered that missive? Whose portrait smirked on its seal? The conspirators were unnerved. Cleopatra's betrayal from within shattered their confidence. In those whispered corridors, the seeds of Caesar's victory took root, planted by the queen they'd dismissed as a mere girl. Close your eyes and picture this. A weightless bundle at the base of a tapestry, drifting gently across marble floors. Then, snap! The tapestry whirls to life, and the bundle tumbles to the ground. The weight slides free. Cleopatra emerges, dusting off silk threads, fixing her regal gaze. This was the moment that cemented her legend, the daring carpet escape. Caesar, tense from weeks of siege, had agreed to meet Ptolemy XIII in the tower chamber. But Cleopatra had other plans. She'd learned through her harem spies that Caesar's captains were doubting Ptolemy's loyalty. If she could slip in unseen, she might persuade Caesar herself. She commissioned a fine Persian rug, sumptuous threads of wool and silk, embroidered with gold thread. When the chamber door creaked open, servants unfurled the carpet. Amidst polite laughter, they rolled Cleopatra inside, knotting the edges before carrying her in. As the carpet entered the chamber, dust motes floated in the torchlight. Caesar looked up, expecting a gift from Ptolemy. Instead, the rug was draped at his feet. He frowned, and then the bundle stirred. Cleopatra stood, silk sleeve brushing marble. The stunned senators and guards froze. Only Caesar's horses whinnied in the stables. Cleopatra bowed, voice soft but clear. "My lord, I come to restore the rightful queen, and to ask your protection." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Caesar approached, studied her royal bearing, and extended a hand. In that simple gesture, he signaled his alliance. Ptolemy's ministers protested, but Caesar, in love with Cleopatra's poise as much as her lineage, demanded her reinstatement. The chamber erupted in chaos, but Cleopatra stood composed, a sly smile playing on her lips. The carpet stunt became the talk of Alexandria. She rolled herself into Caesar's heart. The merchants joked in the forum. That night, Cleopatra dined with Caesar beneath a canopy of stars, sharing wine and philosophical debate. She spoke Greek and Latin with equal fluency, and Caesar, so used to military matters, listened with rapt attention. The carpet escape wasn't just theatre, it was a masterstroke of political theatre. In that one bold act, Cleopatra proved she was no fringe player, but an equal partner in power. Cleopatra knew the alliance needed more than a daring entrance. it needed a public spectacle to cement her legitimacy. By dawn, the docks of Alexandria were alive with activity. Banners waved in the harbor breeze, heralds shouted proclamations in Greek and Egyptian, and citizens thronged the quay to see their rightful queen step back onto her palace grounds. Accompanied by Caesar's Praetorian Guard and her personal retinue, Cleopatra led a triumphal procession through the city. She rode a gilded barge down the royal harbor, lotus flowers bobbing at the bow, priests chanting hymns of rebirth. Onlookers fell silent as she raised her hand, palm open, a sign of peace. Then she gestured to Ptolemy XIII. "Behold, your queen returned." The moment was electric. Some citizens cheered, others wept. Merchants lowered their trading tables. Children raced along the banks, voices echoing off the seawalls. It wasn't just a coronation, it was a festival of renewal. Cleopatra's advisors unveiled a new decree. All temples would recognize her as sole ruler alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, who would be a ceremonial co-regent. The real power, however, resided in Cleopatra's hands, and in Caesar's legionaries, who now patrolled the palace walls. In the weeks that followed, Cleopatra and Caesar appeared together at public ceremonies, sharing sacrifices to Isis and Serapis. Coins were minted with both their profiles, her diademed head facing his laureate profile, signifying a unity of Rome and Egypt. Political rivals who once whispered of her downfall now kissed the ground at her feet. Yet behind the scenes, Cleopatra continued to consolidate power. She replaced key ministers with her own loyalists, reformed tax laws to lighten burdens on the poor, and launched grain shipments to Rome, reminding Caesar of Egypt's importance to his Caesarion party's bread dole. Each gesture, from restoring temple lands to hosting lavish banquets, wove a tapestry of gratitude and obligation around her new alliance. The bold escape had won her Caesar's heart, but the public alliance and administrative reforms secured her throne. She was no longer a dethroned princess. She was the architect of a new Egypt, poised between two great powers, yet determined to rule on her own terms. Power in the ancient world often flowed through marriage and bloodlines. Cleopatra understood this intimately. To solidify her alliance with Caesar, and by extension Rome, she needed heirs who combined Ptolemaic and Roman blood. Enter Caesarion, born in 47 BC at the palace overlooking the Nile. Caesarion's arrival was no private affair. Cleopatra staged a public announcement. A grand procession paraded through Alexandria, carrying the infant in a silver cradle, draped in purple cloth, Rome's sacred color. Priests invoked Osiris and Isis, blessing the child as son of two worlds. Roman soldiers saluted, Egyptian nobles bowed. The message was clear. Caesarion would inherit not only Pharaoh's throne, but also a Roman legacy. But this blood and silk alliance alarmed some Romans. In Rome, senators whispered that Caesar might install a foreign heir, usurping Rome's traditions. Back in Alexandria, Ptolemy XIII's faction claimed Caesarion's birth condemned Egypt to become a Roman province rather than an independent kingdom. Cleopatra met these threats with diplomatic finesse. She invited Roman governors and envoys to lavish banquets, where Greek and Egyptian musicians performed side by side, and the air buzzed with toasts to unity. She sent Caesarion to Rome for a ceremonial visit, ensuring Roman elites saw him as a bridge between cultures rather than a threat. Contemporary accounts, like those of Appian, note how Cleopatra personally penned letters persuading influential senators to support Caesarion's recognition. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, Cleopatra arranged a marriage alliance between her sister Arsinoe and a client king of the Eastern Mediterranean, securing military backing if Ptolemy's faction rebelled. She blended royal bloodlines like a master jeweler setting gems. Each union served both love and strategy. Through these alliances of blood and silk, Cleopatra wove a web that reached from Rome's marble forums to the Nile's fertile delta. She knew that dynastic power required more than fleeting favors. It demanded offspring, marriages, and cultural ties that outlasted any one monarch. And as she nurtured Caesarion, she was already planning the next generation of rulers who would carry her legacy forward. But even the strongest alliances can be tested by the rumble of war. In 47 BC, forces loyal to Ptolemy XIII and his eunuch general Achilles marched on Alexandria's royal quarter. The city's walls trembled under siege engines. Fires lit the horizon. Civilians cowered behind shuttered doors. Cleopatra, now firmly allied with Caesar, faced her greatest test yet. Caesar commanded a mere 4 legions, roughly 20,000 men, against Ptolemy's tens of thousands, bolstered by Greek mercenaries and native troops. The fighting was brutal. Roman catapults lobbed flaming projectiles over city walls. Egyptian archers returned fire from mud brick towers. Streets became trenches. Market stalls turned into barricades. Caesar's wounded lay in makeshift camps, their groans mingling with the clash of bronze and the crack of flaming arrows. Cleopatra, far from cowering, rode out in the midst of the chaos. Clad in chainmail embossed with her family's crest, she rode side-saddle on a stallion, sword in hand. She personally inspired Caesar's troops, distributing water, bandaging wounds, and raising morale. Ancient observers wrote that her presence was like a calming wind amid the storm, a living symbol of their shared cause. Her decisive moment came at the Battle of the Nile, actually a pitched fight along the flooded plains where the river's distributaries fanned the battlefield. Caesar's men used movable towers on boats to outflank Ptolemy's formations. Amid the din, Cleopatra's cavalry struck the enemy's flank, breaking their lines and turning the tide. The battlefield erupted in a roar as Ptolemy's army scattered into the marshes, many drowning in the reeds. The storm passed, leaving Alexandria battered but unbowed. Caesar offered Cleopatra a triumphant handshake. She nodded with steely resolve. In the aftermath, the young co-regent Ptolemy XIII disappeared, presumed dead in the fighting, and Cleopatra was declared sole ruler. The storm on the Nile had been her crucible. She emerged tempered steel. With Alexandria secure and Ptolemy's faction crushed, Cleopatra faced the task of restoration. The palace still bore scorch marks. Temples lay in ruins. Citizens suffered famine after months of siege. She moved swiftly to rebuild, and to ensure her reign would be remembered not for destruction, but for renewal. She reopened grain silos, distributing free wheat to the hungry masses, and ordered grain shipments to Rome, cementing her gratitude to Caesar. She commissioned sculptors to carve reliefs depicting the siege and her role alongside Rome's general, ensuring the story of their alliance would endure in stone. Temples to Isis and Serapis were restored, new shrines to Caesar built, symbolizing the union of Egyptian and Roman deities. In one festival, she had the old walls of the palace torn down and replaced with gleaming limestone facades inscribed with her decree: Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, restorer of peace. Processions wound through the city as priests performed purification rites, scattering ashes from the old gates to the wind, a ritual symbolizing the death of the past and the birth of a new era. Roman envoys witnessed these ceremonies and reported back to the Senate. Cleopatra's image as both liberator and collaborator spread across the Mediterranean. Coins minted that year bore her portrait alongside Caesar's, signifying a co-regency that blended two empires' destinies. Alexandria stood renewed, its leprous wounds healed by Cleopatra's decisive action. From the ashes of war, she had forged a triumph of statecraft as powerful as any battlefield victory, proving that true sovereignty lies not only in holding a throne, but in restoring hope to the people. After months of bloodshed and rebuilding, Cleopatra's final challenge was securing her legacy. Caesar returned to Rome, leaving Cleopatra as Egypt's uncontested ruler and guardian of his heir. On his departure, he bestowed upon her a golden crown, an honor previously reserved for Roman consuls. In a grand ceremony on the palace terrace, she placed it upon her head, the sun catching each facet like a beacon to distant seas. Cleopatra then summoned the Senate of Alexandria, a council of nobles, priests, and military officers. She addressed them not as a French queen might, but with the authority of a pharaoh fused with the pragmatism of a Roman statesman. She outlined reforms: a new treasury system shared with Rome, agrarian laws ensuring fair land distribution, and educational academies teaching Greek, Latin, and Egyptian wisdom to both boys and girls, fulfilling her earlier vision of female education. To cement her reign, she held a final procession through the city, dressed in the robes of Isis, carrying the ankh and scepter. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing off the colonnades. Merchants lowered their awnings, soldiers removed their helmets, even gladiators paused mid-training to bow. Her crown, forged in gold and inscribed with hieroglyphs and Latin letters, glinted like a promise to both worlds. In the days that followed, ambassadors arrived from distant kingdoms, Nabatea, Armenia, even China's Han court, seeking her patronage. Alexandria became the beating heart of a new Hellenistic network, with Cleopatra at its center. The crown she wore was more than ornament. It was a symbol of a reign reforged through intelligence, audacity, and alliance. As dusk fell on Alexandria's harbors, Cleopatra stood on her palace balcony, gazing out at the fleet she'd once commanded. The triremes rocked gently, their sails furled. Behind her lay a shattered dynasty, before her, an empire reborn. The crown she'd claimed was no mere relic. It was the culmination of every risk, every whispered plot, every sword thrust, and every bold word spoken to Caesar himself. And so, under that crown, Cleopatra's sovereignty stood unchallenged. Her story, of carpets, conspiracies, and colossal courage, etched itself into the annals of history, a tale of a woman who refused to be defined by tradition, instead choosing to define an era. If this voyage through her story left you amazed, go ahead and hit subscribe and ring the bell. Ancient Odyssey is your passport to the hidden chapters of history, where heroes don't always look the way you might expect, and where power can shine in the hands of the most surprising champions. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and I'll see you in the next episode.